Hello, welcome.
Hello.
Hello, welcome everyone.
Hello,
Hi, everybody.
Adrian, Toni.
Hi.
Hi.
See, David, you got your wish.
Voila.
So
We're here.
everyone, feel free to unmute and say hello and let us know where you are and what you're up to. And what we're going to try to do is, try to feel that we're actually live, since we're not, but we're going to pretend we are, that we're actually in Paris at Après Midi like we would normally be. But
Most important, how's Toni? Is she okay after testing positive?
Yes, she is.
Tony's
She's still
good.
positive, but she's fine.
Excellent.
there you
Good.
go. So I'd like to say welcome everyone to Après Midi. And first of all, I would like to apologize on one hand for doing this on Zoom and not live. On the other hand, we're quite happy that we were able to expand on our audience today. And the reason that this happened is, first and foremost, our speaker, Toni Kamins, came down with COVID last week or so, right ago, and she was positive, so she couldn't be live. And then I had a little bit of a scare when I was in Nice, because I was surrounded by people who had gotten sick, and some of which had tested positive. So I was concerned that I would be a risk. And then we just realized that this was risky to have everybody in the same room with Omicron going around as fast and furiously as it is. So we decided it was just not a good idea to put people at that risk. And so I hope that you all agree with that. Unfortunately, it was very last minute. So I apologize to anyone who showed up today and had to turn around and go home or do whatever. There were a few people I know who did. We posted a sign at the cafe with an apology and a link to be able to Zoom. And it's looking pretty good right now. It looks like we've got about 40 people and still coming in. So that's a good sign. So I'd like to hear from you guys. Who here is not in Paris? All right. Okay, so where are you guys? Where are you? Blurt it out.
I'm Los Angeles.
Wow.
Charleston, South Carolina.
Washington, D.C.
New York
Virginia.
City. New York.
Minnesota.
Santa Rosa,
California.
Debbie, New York.
I love
Minnesota.
Minnesota.
Oh, my.
Wow. Okay, so in other words, you guys are probably really happy that we ended up doing this on Zoom, right?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
All the time.
Oh, yes. Yeah, and you're still coming in, so I'm really, really pleased.
I want to thank Toni personally, because I used her guide, Jewish Guide to Britain and Ireland in 2004, when I spent 2 weeks in London and Liverpool. Thank you, Toni.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Great. Okay. Anybody else have anything they want to add before we get started?
Somebody has some background noise. I
Yeah.
don't know what it is.
Well, everybody's gonna mute in just a minute when Toni gets on.
I just want to say thank you for doing this on Zoom.
You're quite welcome. We are trying to somehow manage a Zoom and a live at the same time, but it's not an easy.
Thanks, Adrian. Adrian, this is Debbie. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, I hear some background noise from somebody.
Yeah, somebody has a TV or a radio on, it needs to turn off.
TV or radio.
Okay.
I just muted her.
That's the answer. We just mute you, okay? If you're not behaving, that's what we're gonna do.
Sorry.
No, I love that. I love that. So let me introduce a couple of people before I introduce Toni. Patty is Patty. There's Patty Sadowskis, my assistant. who has Villefranche-sur-Mer in her background, looking quite beautiful. And then you might see Bernard with the purple background. Okay,
Hello.
Bernard is also, he's my auxiliary assistant, or he's Patty's assistant. We haven't figured out what they are, but and so Patty and Bernard are basically co-hosting this, and so, you know, if you have any needs or questions, and you guys know how to use the chat room, right? Okay, so you can put your questions in the chat, and Patty and Bernard are going to monitor that and try to keep an eye on it.
Just be sure if you're posting any questions, post them to everyone. Don't send them to me. Don't send them to Bernard. Send them to everyone.
Right. Make it, unless you have something really secretive you want to say, you know, that's the,
Right. But otherwise, post to everyone.
Okay, so are all of you ready to get started? Because if you're ready to get started, then we're going to mute you all. Okay, so Bernard or Patty, go ahead and mute them. And let's see, I think when you do that, Toni and I end up getting muted, but we'll unmute. Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so go ahead and do that.
Okay.
Okay, cool. Toni, you're still on. I'm still on. You can hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. So I want to introduce Toni Kamins, and Toni and I, we realized that we have known each other since about 1997. Is that right? Is that what we decided?
Yeah, that's what we decided.
About 97. So we go back a long way. And Toni is a journalist, a veteran journalist who's covered literally dozens of different subjects for magazines and newspapers. She was born and raised in New York, in case you can't tell by her accent, and she went to graduate school in Paris back in the 70s. And after visiting France for both long and short periods of time over all those decades, she now calls Paris home. Now, this is, of course, after I bugged her for a long time, after she bugged me for a long time, and we finally got her to make the move over. She has always had a passion for history in general, and Jewish history in particular, and has published untold numbers of articles on many of its aspects. So she comes by this subject quite organically, you might say. In the late 90s, she decided to combine this with her love of travel. And in 2001, she wrote The Complete Jewish Guide to France. And then The Complete Jewish Guide to Britain and Ireland were later published, all by St. Martin's Press. Toni, where's your book? Hold up your book.
Oh, yes, the book.
There it is, the book. Okay. Now, in today's world, though, she's moved on to writing about other subjects. You're going to love this. U.S. healthcare policy. Okay, talk about in-depth. Everybody's going, wow. And senior citizen issues, among others. But her Jewish history is really, and its visible legacy in Europe are still probably the closest thing to her heart. And I'm going to let her talk about it, not me. So with that, we all give a hand to Toni Kamins. It's all yours, dear.
Thank you. One thing I want to say about the book, a number of you have emailed me asking where you can get it. The book is now 20 years old. The history obviously hasn't changed, but some of the, site information has changed. And a number of things have been uncovered since then. So while I'm very happy for you to buy the book, there are probably better ways to get some of the site information. The other thing I want to tell you about the book is that in publishing, timing is everything. Both the Complete Jewish Guide to France and the Complete Jewish Guide to Britain and Ireland were published on September 11th, 2001. Which was
not a good day.
Not a good day. And my book launch party was supposed to be that evening at the Museum of Jewish Heritage in Battery Park City, which is right across the street from where the World Trade Center was. So timing is everything. Timing is everything. If I had gotten the manuscript in 6 months before, like I was supposed to, but that's another publishing story. Anyway, on to France. I will be sharing my screen with some photographs and illustrations later, so bear with me on that. So, Jewish history in France goes back a long time. The first evidence we have of Jews in France goes back to the 5th century AD, or CE, if this is a Jewish audience. And in that, we have some evidence of coins that are thought to be Jewish in nature. But the real history, the best documented history goes back to the 6th century. And in 6th century Paris, we have a very small Jewish community that had a synagogue on the site of what is now the Church of Saint-Julien-le-Pauvre in the 5th arrondissement. And there was a cemetery nearby on Rue Monsieur Le Prince, right at where the corner of Monsieur Le Prince and Boulevard Saint-Michel is now. So Jewish history in France is probably close to 2,000 years old. Now, when we talk about France, we think of the map of France that we see now, but this conception of France is relatively new in terms of the centuries. France, for most of its history, the France that we know now was a collection of kingdoms and duchies that now, that used to be adjacent to the Kingdom of France and are now situated in the modern day provinces and regions of the country. So looking at the Jewish history of France as a whole, we need to look at the separate Jewish histories of the areas where the largest Jewish populations were. And for the longest time, those were Provence, Eastern France and the areas of the Upper and Lower Rhine, Alsace and Lorraine now, Paris to a certain extent, but that changed from year to year, depending on the whim of whatever king was in power, and southwestern France, north of Spain, south of Bordeaux.
What about Nice, though? There's quite a history.
Provence, yeah, okay. Yeah. So the most ancient Jewish communities in France are in Provence. And the most notable of them are the 4 cities of Carpentras, Cavaillon, L'Isle-sur-le-Sorgue, and Avignon. What happened there was when at one point in history, there was a schism between the popes in Rome and the rest of Christian Europe, and there was a papacy that was centered in Avignon. And under those popes, there were 4 communities where the Jews were protected, not necessarily treated well, but protected. And those communities were Avignon, L'Isle-sur-le-Sorgue, Cavaillon, and Carpentras. And of those 4, Cavaillon no longer has a Jewish community, but a synagogue, a historic monument synagogue. Carpentras still has a Jewish community, as does Avignon.
They also still have the synagogue there at Carpentras, which I've visited many times.
Yes. It's a beautiful old synagogue. They've been restoring it in pieces for decades. And the synagogue building, parts of it actually go back to the 13th century. Then we move up to the Upper and Lower Rhine, where there was a French/German Jewish community centered not in Strasbourg, but in and around Strasbourg, because Jews were not allowed to live within the city. They could come in and out of the city to do business, but they had to leave at the end of the day. So the Jewish communities around Strasbourg have a number of Jewish sites, which are fairly old and mostly accessible to the public. Some of them are undergoing restoration, so they don't let people in, and they're also very, very fragile. Let me share my screen here with you. This is a mikveh in one of the synagogues in the town of Bischheim, which is outside of Strasbourg.
Tony, we don't see the one photo. We see all your photos at once.
Okay,
You need to share that specific screen. You have to open it up and then share the
all right.
screen. There you go.
There you go. Okay. So this is a mikveh, and the water, which is still in there, is below this concrete plate here. And there are a number of Jewish sites, a lot of synagogues in and around the Upper and Lower Rhine. A number of synagogues in Provence and southwestern France, and of course, Paris. So those are essentially the communities that we look at when we look at the overall history of the Jews in France. Excuse me. That's not to say that there weren't communities in other parts of the country, but much, much smaller. The largest communities were in those 4 places, and still are to a certain extent. So what is the overall history of Jews in France? Generally speaking, it wasn't good. Jews in France, just as Jews in any other country, were at the whim of the local monarch and the church, and were not allowed to practice any trades other than certain specific things that were allotted to them: sales, textile industries,
Money. They don't.
yes, money lending, yes. And as a result, Jews were not well thought of, and the church was, as usual, the instigator in a lot of trials and persecutions of the Jewish population, and in fomenting anti-Jewish laws. Life for Jews in the Middle Ages, which is the biggest part of the period that we're talking about, was not easy. They were relegated to living in ghettos, which in the southern part of France was known as, they were known as a carrière. And life was extremely circumscribed. They came and went at the behest of the local governors and monarchs, and were locked in at night. There are places in Cavaillon and Avignon where you can still see the chains on the entrance to the carrière.
There are places like that in Nice as well, and I've seen them in Pézenas.
Yes,
In the
Pézenas has
Occitanie.
an old ghetto,
Yes,
yeah.
Southwest, yes.
Yep, yes. So that was pretty much the lot of Jewish life in medieval France, and continued up until the eve of the French Revolution, when many non-Jews argued for civil rights for Jews in France. And then when Napoleon came to power, he decided that mixing Jews into the general population of France was in his interest and in the interest of empire. So he created a council that was charged with trying to figure out what about Judaism was incompatible with being a citizen in France and what would work. So a number of changes were instigated in Jewish practice at that time, and the Jews had to trade what was a fair amount of religious autonomy for some control by the state, and in exchange, they got civil rights, which was not without its problems. For centuries, Jews were their own self-government, their own communities within the larger empire. And now all of a sudden, the ghetto walls come down. They're allowed to mix with non-Jewish society. And it was a huge emotional, it took a huge emotional toll. Many Jews converted to Christianity, to Catholicism, one of whom was the son of one of the chief rabbis. And it was a traumatic time. For the most part, the French state has kept its part of the bargain. Of course, there were some notable slips, the Dreyfus affair.
I was about to say, big slip.
Yeah, whoops. Yeah, the Dreyfus affair, the Shoah, of course, and what goes forward remains to be seen. But so in looking at, let me just share the screen here. Have you got this? This is
I still have we still have the other photo.
okay. Let me get rid of that. Okay.
There we go.
Okay, this is one of the statues on the front of Notre Dame, which you can't get close to right now for obvious reasons. This is a statue known as Ecclesia. Ecclesia represents the church in direct opposition to Judaism, which is represented by a statue called Synagogue. And here you can see Ecclesia has a halo, a crown, a staff. Her clothes are not disheveled. She's carrying a goblet. And this is the light, the truth of Christianity, as opposed to let's see what we've got here. Sorry about that.
We're waiting.
Yeah, I'm trying to share this here.
Because now there's a big, crescendo going on here. We want to see what
Yeah,
this
so
looks like.
sorry about that. All right, well, I can't get it up on the screen here. Anyway, it's the statue of Synagogue is the direct opposite of Ecclesia. It's got a.
You can't get it up. You can't get it up.
I can't. No.
Click on it and then share the screen and then click on it.
Yeah, I can't find the photo now.
Okay. We'll come back to it after.
Okay.
Maybe I can find it.
Yeah, but you would need access to my computer.
No. It's called synagogue.
Synagogue, yeah.
Ah.
Did you find it?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
In fact, I have the two together.
Oh, okay, that's fine.
Let's see if I can do it and then I can. Okay, I'm going to share my screen now. Let's see. There.
Okay, that works. That works. This is not the one from Notre Dame, but it works. This is a motif.
Oh, this is from
on-
the Strasbourg Cathedral.
Yes, yeah. This is a motif on many churches in France and Germany. So you see on the left in this picture another representation of ecclesia. Not exactly the same one as on Notre Dame, but you have the same elements: the crown, the goblet, the nice raiment, the staff, and on the right is synagogue. So you see here, synagogue's staff is broken in the middle. She's blindfolded because she doesn't recognize the light of Christianity. And you can't quite see what, no crown. In the one on Notre Dame, the crown is at her feet. So as I said, this is a fairly typical motif in statuary in France and Germany on churches, and also in stained glass representations. Okay, you can get rid of that. Thank you.
Done.
And there's all sorts of what's called anti-Jewish church art all over Europe. And it's actually quite interesting. Once you learn to recognize the design elements, you'll never look at another church again the same way. Another element on churches in France is what's called a porte juive. For those of you who don't speak French, that's the Jew's door. And you find this on cathedrals in southern France. That is where Jews were forced to stand and listen to church sermons, trying to cajole them into converting. Usually the port.
Did it work? Did it work?
In some cases, yes. In some cases. But that never stopped anybody from trying. Typically, the porte juive was actually smaller than the main doors to the cathedral. In Paris, I started out by saying the earliest Jewish community in Paris was around the area of Saint-Julien-le-Pauvre, which is just across the river from Notre Dame. And Jews lived on the left bank for many centuries before they were cast out of the French kingdom, which at the time did not exist north of the second arrondissement under Philippe Auguste. So after they were expelled from the area that's now the fifth arrondissement, they ended up settling across the river in an area that's known as the Marais, and that's probably the most famous Jewish area in France, even though it's no longer the largest Jewish community in Paris. That accolade now belongs to the 17th arrondissement.
Really? The 17th?
Yeah.
Not the
Yep.
9th?
No, 17th is the biggest. The 9th is nearly as big, but the demographic is very different. The 17th is middle to upper middle class, and the 9th is not.
More
And-
middle.
And right, and the 19th is where most Orthodox Jews live.
Alongside their Muslim neighbors.
Yes, and that's true in the suburbs as well. So the area in the Marais still has a large number of synagogues, a lot of historic synagogues that you can see today. You usually now need security clearance to go inside, unfortunately, but most of the historic synagogues are still in the Marais and in the 9th arrondissement, in the area called Lower Montmartre. Some of the other sites around Paris are not obviously Jewish. There's a memorial to the people who were to the Jews who were rounded up by the French police in 1942. The memorial to the Velodrome d'Hiver, which is in the 15th arrondissement. And a number of monuments you can also see around the city, or from where Jews were deported in the Second World War. Which brings me to the contemporary Jewish community in France, which is the third largest Jewish community in the world, outside of Israel and
The US.
United States. There are excuse me, I've got COVID brain very badly. There are a number of tours that you can take of Jewish sites around the country. Walking tours, driving tours, professional tours. There are books that will guide you along a particular route. But if you're interested, I encourage you to take a look at some of the sites. Most of them are in places where there is no longer a Jewish community, but you can see the vestiges of it in street names: Rue de Juif, Rue de Synagogue, Carrefour de Synagogue, things like that. Those are all indications of a Jewish community having lived in that area at some point. Excuse me. Now, Jews really came into their own in France in the 19th century. If you go around the country, with very few exceptions, there are no synagogues from after the Middle Ages and until the middle of the 19th century. Synagogues were not allowed to be built, and it was only in the middle of the 19th century that it was again permitted. So you'll see a huge number of synagogues, especially in the Upper and Lower Rhine. And though most of those are currently preserved either as museums or put to different uses. There are some places in the Upper and Lower Rhine where you can see where there are a few Jewish museums. There are synagogues that were hidden from view. They were in somebody's house. They were in an attic, in a basement, until the time when synagogues were allowed to be built again and were allowed to be used. And that's true for houses of Jewish study. Up until the Revolution, the only rabbinical seminary in France was in Alsace, And after the revolution, it moved to Paris, where it is today. Okay, so contemporary Jewish France, the third largest Jewish community in the world, and a very active Jewish community, very, very French, more French than the French, and thriving despite a lot of, I know you read a lot in the American press about how Jews are, moving from France to Israel in droves. The numbers there never had any place to go but up. Immigration from France to Israel is up somewhat, but for the most part, this is a very vibrant Jewish community, not without problems and not without challenges, but a very vibrant community nonetheless. A testament to that is that the Center for European Judaism was built just a few years ago and dedicated in the 17th arrondissement. And they're packed. And today, we look to the French Jewish community for their historical presence in the country, and for their activity, their level of activity in Jewish affairs around the world. And Toni speak about current anti-Semitism in France, especially Paris. Well, we
knew we were going to
well,
get
we
that.
knew we were coming to that. Okay.
Question. I was just about to say, Toni, that you and I have attended together some even Yiddish, some like Yiddish theater and music,
Yes,
and things of that, which there's all sorts of, I mean, where do you get that? In the States, anywhere, what's the instrument, klezmer?
yeah.
Music and Yiddish theater and all of that stuff. Where do you find that in the States? Only in New York?
Probably only New York, yeah. Maybe LA to a certain extent,
Maybe.
but mostly New York. Yeah,
It is
Paris
all
has
over the United States. Even Knoxville, Tennessee has a klezmer group that performs all the time.
That's, by the way, that's my sister Lee.
Oh, hi.
And I'm very well aware of everything going on Jewish around the United States, and it is thriving.
Yes, it is. So the Jewish community in France is thriving. Conventional wisdom notwithstanding. So you want to know about anti-Semitism in France? Okay, is there anti-Semitism in France? The answer is yes. There's anti-Semitism everywhere, even on the streets of New York, unfortunately. I've written a little bit about this, and unfortunately, what a lot of people take away from it is that people are on the street with guns hunting Jews. That's not the case. Far from it. What is going on? There is a fair amount of terrorism in France. That's not a secret. Some of it is directed towards Jews. That's not a secret either. But you could say the same thing about the United States if you add in, white supremacy. My take on the whole thing is that we are living in a different time. The period in which Adrian and I grew up, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, and in general, the period following World War II was kind of a bubble. People didn't make anti-Semitic remarks in polite company. They left it behind closed doors. But now it's become more permissible to say nasty things about Jews. And my take on this is that the bubble that we grew up in is over, and now it's back to business as usual. Because if you look at Jewish history, not only in France, but in the rest of the world, the kind of stuff that we're hearing and seeing today was fairly common before the Holocaust. I remember my parents telling me, my parents grew up in New York. I remember my parents telling me that help wanted ads saying Jews need not apply was not an uncommon occurrence. There were places where Jews couldn't work. There were places where Jews couldn't live. There were places where Jews couldn't go. And there are still places like that. But I spend summers in the Hamptons fairly often. There are country clubs that still don't admit Jews. It's just, it's the way things were. And unfortunately, it's the way things are again. Probably one of the biggest issues now is the question of anti-Zionism and whether or not that's the same thing as anti-Semitism. I don't want to get into a whole thing about that. In my opinion, it is, but there are those who disagree. And anti-Zionism has long been a dog whistle for anti-Semitism. And you see an awful lot of that in demonstrations in Paris. Does it escalate into violence? Only to the extent that the demonstration itself escalates into violence, which it frequently does. I mean, I think what most people want to know when they ask about anti-Semitism in France is whether or not it's safe to come here. And my answer to that is, yeah, it's as safe as any other place. If you let anti-Semitism stop you from traveling, you're probably not going anywhere.
Well, and Toni, let's face it, this is a much safer place to be anyway, because there's just no gun culture.
That's true too. That's true too. Yes, if you get killed in France, it's probably not going to be by a gun.
A scooter is what you're going to get killed by,
Yeah, a scooter or a bicycle, yeah.
Particularly in Paris. I contend that there's no one's dying of COVID because they're going to get hit by a bike or a scooter before that.
Yeah. So, yeah, there is anti-Semitism in France. There's a lot of anti-Semitism in France, but there's also a lot of anti-Semitism in the United States. It kind of come out from under the law. It was hiding in for a long time. And that's the era we're living in now.
All you have to do is Google David Duke if you want to see anti-Semitism in the United States.
Yeah, if you really want to Google David Duke, then...
Is it okay to make a comment?
Sure.
Okay, I don't know if you remember some years ago when that elderly woman was killed by her neighbor.
Yeah, Sarah Halimi, yeah.
Yes, and there was a huge demonstration that we went to because we happened to be in Paris, and all kinds of people, and a lot of people who identified as Catholic. But what was interesting is Marine Le Pen came, and everybody had cameras on her, and the right wing is really trying to use that as a way, just like in this country with race, try to use that to get power. The other interesting thing I have found over there, we've been going for about 20 years. We have an apartment there. We have a lot of French friends. And a number of our French friends, the anti-Semitism is so deep, so deep. You wouldn't even see it and hear it unless, they were incredibly comfortable with you and then started telling jokes. And that happened with some friends of ours who were not sure we're going to be friends anymore. But it was so accepted. And these are people who are extremely educated. There were a couple of Jews there too who didn't say anything. My French was not really good enough to be able to say something, and it was about 12 people, but it was just totally accepted, totally accepted. So I think they're, sort of both of those strains.
I'd like
that
to make
gets-
one comment to that.
Yeah,
John,
go
if
ahead.
you don't mind. My only comment to that is that in general, okay, the French openly discuss everything they feel, good or bad or otherwise, without caring about being politically correct. And I've heard them openly say anti-gay, anti-whatever. I mean, it doesn't seem to matter, which is very different than the American idea of being politically correct and maybe thinking it but not saying it. So that's the only thing that I have witnessed over all these years is that they're very open about anything they think.
That's pretty much the case, but Michelle, your experience is equally true. The unfortunate thing about the right wing is that they're essentially running on anti-immigration platforms, and by denouncing anti-Semitism, the implication is that there's one particular group in France that is causing the anti-Semitism, that's the Muslims, and they are anti-Muslim immigration. So that's how those things tie up. And it's reprehensible. But I think probably the one thing that the French, the French right wing and the American right wing have in common is the anti-immigration stance. And in France, immigration means Muslims.
Tony, if I could just say one thing about all that, and
Sure.
Forgive me for interrupting.
No.
I've lived and worked in France as a journalist off and on since 1980. So I go way back. I was the first journalist on the scene when when they blew up that the Goldenberg.
Oh, right, yeah.
And so, I mean, I've seen all these, every conceivable kind of attack against Jews. And I can tell you that the French, I've never experienced really direct anti-Semitism anywhere in France. I have scores and hundreds of French friends, many of whom are, quite far right. Some of them are quite far left. And I think they all treat me as and Pamela as well. My wife, who's never actually lived there for any great length of time, but they've treated us, I think, as Americans, but certainly not necessarily singling them out as Jews. And we belong to a synagogue there, Kahila Kasher, which I commend to all of you who are in France. A little publicity for them. And it's a wonderful institution. So I don't feel at all that way. Now, as far as the right wing, I think the right wing in France is not that dissimilar to the right wing in the United States. It's always been very pro-Israel in many respects. So some of it might have some anti-Semitic roots, but I don't think so. Some of it may be opportunistic, but I don't think so. It's just the way that part of the of French politics and American politics has always held itself. So so I don't think it's rooted in anti-Semitism in any way. And Pamela is welcome to jump in. She often has views very different from myself, and she's right here. Here.
Well, I think that.
Have you experienced anti-Semitism in France?
No, I haven't. But I think that we have such different. I think the difference is that the American culture is much younger than the French, and I believe that the French probably have been taught from the days when you had the two statues showing you these things that has had to have an effect on the population. So it's something that they've lived with for so long. It's just so much newer in the United States. We got a few hundred years.
But
so
remember, the French also experienced firsthand Vichy and Nazi occupation in Vichy France.
Right.
Now, very few of these people who actually experienced that firsthand are still alive. But it's in their DNA, it's in their families, it's in their society, that this is something that we never want to repeat again. And this is why I suspect that the French right wing, the proto-Nazi right wing in many cases, only get no more than like a 30% of the vote in the elections. The French do not want to turn their country over to the far right, potentially pro-Nazi far right. So anyway, that's all we wrote.
Yeah, that I agree with you on. I can't see the far right, getting more than just the a relative fringe of votes, and certainly not in the larger cities.
I've certainly never experienced any kind of firsthand anti-Semitism ever. In fact, I do more business with more Jews and have more Jewish friends here than I ever had in the United States.
Well, I actually have experienced it a few times, not recently, but when I was in grad school here in the 70s, it was uncomfortable. It was uncomfortable. And that was also
experiencing anti-Semitism, or you were experiencing the reaction, the fact that you were an American in this French setting.
It was anti-Semitism. It was around the time of the Zionism is racism resolution at the UN. It was uncomfortable. And then there was a student restaurant that was firebombed. It was not fun. It wasn't like, I walked out of my apartment and felt like I had to put on armor, but it was
50 years ago. That was
50 years ago. Yeah, yes, it was. Don't remind me.
It would be really interesting, Adrian, if you wanted to do this, to have a separate time when we can talk about the politics in France and the relationship to anti-Semitism, because I actually do not agree with the two previous speakers, even given their, I think, deeper involvement in France probably than I have. But I think it would be really interesting to talk about it.
Yeah, Michelle, you're not alone. I think certainly everybody's got different experiences. Adrian, who's lived here a hell of a lot longer than I have, has different experiences from me. David, as a well-known journalist, has different experiences still, but you're not alone in your thinking.
Mm.
I mean, I've got family who won't set foot in France, so.
Yeah.
Toni, do you want to take any of these other these questions that are in the chat?
Let me take a look here. Let's see. Those of you who've asked questions and would like do you want to raise your hand and we can unmute you? Okay. Sarah Vaughn, I see you first. So.
Oh, hello, Michelle. Hi, my name is Dana Fay.
Yes.
What? Sorry. Hi, Toni. Anyway,
hi.
Thank you very much. I'm enjoying getting to know you and your work, and I will pursue further, but thank you. I have a question. Anti-Semitism has to be taught. It has to be modeled or passed on. And I wondered how much of that happens in the schools versus the family.
I would imagine it happens in the family and not the schools. French schools are, it's not part of the educational system. To the extent that it ever was, I would say that it was probably in religious schools, but it would have to come from the family. French schools are models of laïcité.
So essentially, families with those points of view hang out with other families with those points of view, and it becomes very tribal.
My son, back in the 1980s when we lived in Paris, I went to the École Bilingue. But before he went in that, he was in an ordinary, because we got to France late, he was in an ordinary primary school. He was about 4 years old then. And he spoke no French, none whatsoever. And so he was thrown into this class of entirely French speakers. And so he had a great deal of trouble at first. And he very quickly acquired, he's fairly dark haired and whatever, like he looks a lot like me before I turned gray. And he was always called Philippe Espagnol. That became his name because they thought he looked like a Spaniard and he didn't speak English. So what do you call him? He was a Spaniard. He was not Philippe, not Philippe the Juif or whatever. He was Philippe Espagnol. So that's, that is as close, I guess, you can get to it. Anti-whatever, then you could find it. It's been in my personal experience.
My daughter experienced anti-Americanism in her collège. She was the only American in the school, and she felt it even then at the age of 11. But anti-Americanism, not anything else.
Yeah. Yeah, anti-Americanism is used to be a lot more common. It's less common now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, anybody else want to unmute and ask a question?
Here's one that says, is it possible to get Paris Jewish family documents concerning records out of the official document who were at, I'm not sure I understand the question actually now that I'm reading it. I think it's Jean-Pierre Deschler. Maybe he wants to ask that. Jean-Pierre, you want to ask it yourself?
I see, okay.
Il est français. I don't know. I haven't found him.
Pamela has a question.
Yes, thank you. In the synagogue's hand, there's a piece of paper or something.
Mhm.
I imagine that has a lot of symbolism. So if you could mention that.
Yeah, in most of the representation that represents the Ten Commandments, and in some of the synagogue representations, it takes the form of the tablets, and they're cracked and falling to the ground.
Wow. Okay. And Barbara Levy has a comment. Barbara, you want to unmute and comment?
All I wanted to say is that I worked as a banker for 30 years at 3 different French banks, and I have never experienced any anti-Semitism here in France. Maybe when you're called Levy, people just don't do anything, but I don't really, I've never experienced it. I don't have a question, it was just a comment.
And it's funny that you say that, okay, Barbara, that your name was Levy, because we were talking earlier, and one of the things I've noticed about the Jewish community here is that the Jews here have not anglicized or francicized their names. They seem to have their original names. Whereas, so many Jews in the United States, in order to get jobs, do business, anglicize their names. My name Leeds comes from Liebstein. So, and that was typical, but I don't see that here. They still have their original long involved, Eastern European or French names.
I think you're right. I don't know anyone who's changed their name.
Our niece, who has a very Jewish name, I must tell you, I won't tell you what it is, and I won't tell you which bank she works for, but she does work for one of the large French multinational banks here and in Paris. She goes back and forth. I don't think she's ever experienced any sense of anti-Semitism at all. She's very highly respected, was just promoted, in fact, to a very high position there. So, I agree with Barbara very much on that.
So I have a friend who didn't find out she was Jewish who grew up in Paris, didn't find out she was Jewish until she was 18. Her last name, believe it or not, was Levy, and her parents came from Algeria. So I think this is way more complicated than some people are saying. I have another very good friend who is also Jewish, but was a banker for her whole life. Her father was a resistant who was killed, and she kept it very secret. She married an American, so she had a different name. So I just think this is way more complicated than people just saying, I've never experienced anti-Semitism.
I agree with that. I agree with that.
There's a question here, Tony. Can you talk a bit about the distribution of Ashkenazi versus Sephardic Jews historically?
For the most part, for much of French Jewish history, Jews were essentially Ashkenaz. They came from Germany. They migrated west from there. There has always been a Sephardic community, but since the Second World War, the Sephardic community has grown exponentially. In fact, the Sephardim are responsible in large part for the resurgence of Orthodox Judaism in France. Today, I think the Sephardic community is probably dominant. The chief rabbis, the last few chief rabbis have been of Sephardic descent. So most of the Ashkenazi Jews many families lost significant numbers of people during the Shoah. So I would say France today is predominantly Sephardi in origin, although they've been in France for so many generations at this point that these are now French Jews.
If I could, that was actually my question, and I was thinking more about historically. For instance, in Provence, were they back then they were also Ashkenazi?
No, that when you go back that far, you have fewer definite divisions between Sephardi Jews and Ashkenazi Jews. The Jews in Provence, some of them originated in Italy.
And Spain, perhaps too.
And Spain, yeah, exactly. Now, back then, the Ashkenazi Jews lived in the northeastern part of the country. The Mediterranean Jews, the Italian Jews, Turkish Jews tended to gravitate toward Provence. And after the expulsion from Spain, Jews went to the southwest. The Jews that went to that stayed in the western part of the continent went to Bayonne and Bordeaux, and other Jews went to Provence and other parts of the country. So to that extent, they were Sephardic. Today's Sephardic Jews are essentially North African in origin.
But Tony, weren't many of the North African Jews, many of them were Pieds Noirs, right? And those were originally from mainland France who went over to Algeria, lived there for several generations sometimes.
Right, yes. Okay. Though, yeah, the Pieds Noirs are different altogether, but there was a huge migration from North Africa after France gave up the colonies. And it's those Jews and the descendants of those Jews that are predominant now.
Jean-Pierre, don't you want to ask your question yourself? He's written it now in French. Do you see it?
Yes, I do see it.
Possible de remonter. Okay.
Okay. Ah, okay.
The question is, repeat.
Okay, sorry. The question is, the question is, he wants to know if there are official documents of the Jewish community that date back to before the Commune in 1870. There are There are community documents. I think probably your best source for those is a place called the Midi Yiddish Library. Have you investigated that?
Where is that?
It's I think it's in the third. But you know, Google them. It's MEDEM Yiddish Library.
Maybe Patty can Google it and give us a link. Patty or Bernard. Okay.
I just wanted to say, I grew up in Lincoln, Nebraska. And although I've traveled to France for over 30 years, I have yet to experience any anti-Semitism anywhere in Paris or the surrounding cities. But I will tell you a quick story. When I was 6 or 7, walking down my little street in Lincoln, Nebraska, and I remember it was a little street, a lady came out and started yelling at me to tell me I killed Jesus. I had no idea what she was talking about. That is the only time in my life so far that I've ever experienced anything like that. I feel very safe in Paris. I do not walk around with the Star of David. I will tell you that. And I don't know why I don't, because I have some quite beautiful ones, as probably Adrian and Toni do. But anyway, I just wanted to share that with everyone.
Well, thank you, Judy. And you know what, Judy, we were saying earlier that if you were not on this webinar, it would not be the same. Because I don't think you ever miss any of them.
I do not. And I'll see you in April in person.
Oh, great.
Could I just make a comment on that? I mean, I think it is problematic when we use our individual experiences to say there's no anti-Semitism in French society.
But no one has said that. No one has said that. They're only saying I mean, every single person has only expressed what their own personal experience was.
No, I understand. I understand that. But when the Bataclan was attacked and all those people were killed, there was almost nothing in the French press about the fact that the owners of the Bataclan previously were Jewish, and that the attack was because they were Jewish. So there is this greater piece, I think, that we're not talking about. So I just wanted to make that comment, because I've never experienced anti-Semitism in France either.
Michelle, could I ask?
With my friends.
Could I ask you, Michelle, what has your particular anti-Semitic experience been in France?
Only my friends telling jokes in front of me that are incredibly anti-Semitic.
French friends.
My French friends.
Okay.
My French friends who are incredibly educated and, you know.
Is it documented that the attack on the Bataclan was specifically because the owners were Jewish, or is that an assumption?
It depends on who you ask.
No, I wrote about that extensively. It was certainly not because of any anti-Semitic issue in the Bataclan. It was
about Israel and about Jewish.
Okay, it was not.
Yeah, I mean, I don't agree with you. I understand you did that, but there was a lot of sort of background about that the French do not say these people, and it was also the attack on, you know, the newspaper, that the people who were killed were primarily Jewish. So
you're referring to Charlie Hebdo?
Yes, yes, it's an undercurrent. You know, it's the same way when you go around and you see the things where it said, you know, so many Jews were taken from this school or whatever. It's only in fairly recent years that the French have even acknowledged their participation in this.
That's true.
So, I just don't think it's as simple as everybody is saying.
No, I agree with you, Michelle. It's not as simple as personal experience. Personal experience only goes as far as personal experience, and making generalizations from personal experience is a logical fallacy. But yes, it's a much more complex, much more nuanced issue than even than what we're talking about here. And whoever suggested a discussion about the topic in general, I think that that makes sense.
Karen, it looked like Karen wanted to say something.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was really late. I'm a Jewish tour guide, American in Paris, 23 years. Sorry I was late, Tony. I had 80 people in Baltimore.
That's okay.
I've been giving a Jewish tour for the past 11 years in Paris, 4 to 5 times per week, and over 20,000 people since COVID started. I've been discussing all this, and the first question is, don't the French hate all the Jews? And I'm like, well, the French hate everybody. So I don't really know where, I mean, I try to make light of things, and, my husband's been converting for a long time, and most of his friends are not Jewish. My kid's 11. My kid is the only Jewish kid in every school he's ever been in. His name is Azriel, doesn't get more Jewish than this. He has never had a problem, and 98% of his friends are all Muslim. Again, we can all only give our personal experiences. I had more problem growing up in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, than anywhere else in my life. I think anywhere it's a big city, you have a little bit better of an education, but we have to admit over 200,000 Jews have left in 10 years to go to Israel and Canada. So when I started giving a tour in 2010, there were 680,000 Jews. Now we're down to 480. So no matter what we all say, something's going on somewhere. There's a lot of bullying, and that's more towards the Orthodox. I think the kids are out in the streets, and then other kids are saying dirty Jew like they did in America to a lot of small town people. This is not a new story. It's never been easy to be chosen.
Karen,
we can talk about this for days.
Karen, right after the Bataclan and especially that the attack on that Jewish delicatessen, a lot of Jews did leave France, but I think you'll find that after a year or two, a lot of them came back. And so the statistics that don't they show the Jews that have left, they haven't showed the Jews that have quietly filtered back and said, all right, okay, it's my home. I love France. I'm French. And
David, I can remember when there was an exodus, and I attributed it mostly to economics.
Yes.
When Hollande was in power and taxes went up on the rich, and business was even more difficult to do. And it seemed to me that there were opportunities to do business in other places better than in France. And knowing Jewish culture, it wouldn't surprise me if that was a big reason for leaving.
I think the statistics bear that out, actually. The tendency was to take the questionnaires that came out at the time and look further down on the questionnaire. And yeah, most Jews would say, yeah, there is anti-Semitism in France, but I think overwhelmingly the reasons cited for leaving was economic. Yeah.
Right, because anti-Semitism at the time was an awfully good excuse.
And Israel's the Jersey Shore. For the French Jew. I mean, that's,
Yeah, that's
well,
true.
If you're Jewish, Israel has to accept you. You don't have to go through a visa process. It's very easy.
And Quebec is cold.
And they don't speak French there anyway.
Not our French. I'm really sorry I missed this, Tony.
I lived in Montreal, so I can say yes, the French in Canada is not French. It's Canadian.
No, it's not.
Exactement.
I do have a question, if I can interject. I'm not trying to cut you off, Karen. Are you still speaking? Okay. I did post a question a long time ago, which you probably didn't see. But when you talked about the statues of Ecclesia, I think that's what you said.
Ecclesia.
And synagogue, why are they depicted as women? Why are those statues or those personages women?
Sorry, the sound is going in and out. Can you repeat that?
Oh, sure. I wanted to know, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Better.
I wanted to know why those statues are depicted as women.
That's a good question, to which I do not have an answer.
Oh.
That's a good question. I don't know.
That's because they're probably more anti-women than anti-Jewish.
Remember, Joan of Arc and Marianne are the epitomes of the French state, and they're women.
Yes.
It is.
Are you talking about
I
synagogue?
don't know why, but yeah, they are women, and I don't know why they're women.
Are you talking about synagogia in front of Notre Dame?
Yeah, ecclesia and synagogue. I don't know why they're women.
I don't know either, but I know when you went in the church, you were a sinner, and when you came out, you were a saint. And a lot of churches in Paris, specifically on Rue Mouffetard, and there's another one, Rue Saint Honoré, Église de Saint Roch, in the front, on the bima, so to speak, of the stage for the rest of you. There it says Adonai in Hebrew in the churches. And everybody asks me why. I don't have an answer.
There are many French churches in France that have a Star of David in them somewhere. There's in Lyon, that beautiful Frontier or something, I don't know. It's got something on it, and right across the street from it is a little shul, or a little church with a Jewish star on it. So there's a lot of things. In Florence, there's a church that has a Jewish star on it, and I asked somebody why that was, and I was told that the architect for that church was Jewish, and the Pope gave him permission to put the Jewish emblem on the church.
The traditional Jewish emblem is not the Star of David. It's the menorah. There is in Colmar, where there is an interesting small Jewish community, there are Jewish stars in the quarter not far from the synagogue, and those are all former breweries. They really have nothing to do with Judaism. The traditional symbol of Judaism is a menorah. The Jewish star is actually fairly recent, century-wise, fairly recent.
What does the Nora look like?
The candelabra.
Oh, menorah.
Yeah, menorah.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions?
I have a totally different question. Are the Jews in France, are they as prominent supporters of the arts and cultural endeavors as they are in the United States? Or maybe
Yes.
it's not even applicable in France, I don't know.
Yes, they are.
Because I know in the United States, almost every art institute, cultural, institute, or it never has a Jewish name attached to it, where they
Yes,
are
yeah. The Jews in France are extremely active in civil society, as Jews in practically every country are.
Of course, the state here, really supports the arts in a huge way. So the private individual doesn't have as much need to support the arts as it does in the United States either.
There's no tax incentive in France, right? Because you can't deduct deductions to charitable organizations from your taxes.
Well, yeah, but that's not really the reason, David.
Well, that's true.
Yeah.
Because just imagine how much art and culture there is everywhere, free, open to the public here, on every level. Yeah. David, you're muted if you're talking.
No, I was actually not talking, but surprisingly, I was not talking. But in fact, I think you'll find you have to pay to get into most museums in France. You don't have to pay to get into most museums in France unless you have a press card.
There you go.
Somebody asked the question, is the traditional menorah with 7 candles? The answer to that is yes. The candelabra that's used for Hanukkah has 9, and that's not called a menorah, it's called a Chanukiah.
Very good.
Anybody else you want to unmute? Going once?
Hello, hello, hello.
I just
Yes.
want to say I
Oh,
found this very
Yeah,
interesting.
I'd like, I was in Israel and I was very unhappy what happened between Israel and the Palestinians in the past year with bombing each other and stuff. And I don't know if that has anything to do with France, but
Has a lot to do with France, Pamela.
okay, I would love to join a group or an organization that works towards harmony and connection and peace with these two groups. And I don't know if you have a suggestion for that or to, or a site or something. Thank you.
I don't, but I was actually just reading about something like that, and I've forgotten the name. But I think if you Google Israeli-Palestinian peace groups or something like that, you'll find what you need.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you.
Long road that is, dear.
Yes. Actually, one of the best ways to learn about what's going on in the French Jewish community, good and bad, is to sign up for the newsletter of the Consistoire Central. They have a newsletter that comes out every day, and there are articles and discussions and what have you. There's also a new publication called K, which is kind of a new look on Jewish life in Europe as a whole. It's published in France, but it's a European rather than solely a French outlook.
Post links for those? Or could somebody post links for those?
Well,
Yeah, I don't.
Patty and Bernard will find the links and post them in the chat.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. And by the way, I'd like to just let everybody know that we are recording this, which I didn't say in the beginning. And so we will be making this available for a repeat performance if you want to watch it or share it with your friends. And I'll be posting that in tomorrow's newsletter. Okay. Anyone have any other questions?
I just want to make a comment. I just want to apologize. I didn't realize, how fuzzy I was from my my bout with COVID, and I do now.
Well, Toni, you've done very, very well. No one would have known.
No, not at all.
Can I just jump in and ask one clarification because I wasn't ready? The K publication,
Yes.
is it called K La Revue?
Yes.
Okay, then there's the link.
Oh, great.
Toni, one question. Are you vaxxed and boosted? And do you have any idea where you got it?
I have no idea where I picked it up. Yes, I'm double vaxxed. I'm boosted. I had my flu vaccine, everything. I have no idea where I picked it up. I just, in a restaurant or on the bus or something. And they're pretty strict about the masks on the bus too. So I don't know. It's in the air. Fortunately, it didn't feel, it doesn't feel anything like anything more than a very bad cold. That was the worst of it. And, but I've been symptomatic since New Year's Eve. And the worst of it was the first 4 or 5 days, and the last several days some mornings I wake up and I feel fine, and other mornings I wake up and I feel like I can't get out of bed. So who knows? I don't know where I picked it up.
And this is, I mean, this is why we chose to do this on Zoom, because so many people are getting sick and it's so easy to pick up that we really didn't want to take the risk of bringing the group together live. Yeah.
And I didn't think I was going to test negative at this point anyway, so.
Yeah. By the way, speaking of COVID, I was able to get home tests today at the pharmacy for about €5 each. And they're not official. You can't use them to, to travel with, but at least for your own knowledge, it's easy and you don't have to stand in line, and wait. Or, and when you do the antigen test, if you don't have a carte vitale, then it's going to cost you about €25, I imagine.
Unless you have symptoms, in which case it'll be free.
Really? Is that how it works?
Yeah.
So if you have symptoms, it's free?
Yep.
That I didn't know.
Yep.
Wow. Okay, well, if there's no more questions, okay.
There's one quick question.
Sure.
Someone asked, Tony, you said the conquistador. Something about that. There's a question.
Oh, the concept of
that's the Consistoire Centrale.
Consistoire.
So the link, if you can post it, Patty or Bernard, it's consistoire.org.
.org.
That's the primary Jewish organization, right?
Yes. Yeah, that's the official Jewish organization of
that all the synagogues belong to and whatever. Yeah.
Okay, I got it.
Most of the synagogues.
Oh yeah, there you go. Consistoire.org.
Correct.
Okay. And is there anywhere anybody can get your book?
Yeah, you can find it on some, used book sites, if you want to buy it. But I'm actually thinking about doing something web oriented with it. But, feel free to buy it. Just don't pay list price. And as a writer, I'm loath to send you to the discount sites because I don't get any royalties from that. But
it's
get it as cheaply as you can.
And it's 20 years old, so
it's 20 years old. Yeah.
Why aren't you going to write a new one?
I wrote it. It was really before the web is what it is now. Mm-hmm. And I don't think a book would work like that, which is why I've been trying to play with, some web-based ideas. But the history is the history. That hasn't changed.
Right.
You can't find it new on Amazon.
You might be able to find it on some of the used book sites on Amazon. Amazon's going to charge you full price. Don't pay full price.
Well, I mean, if they want to pay full price, Tony, they can.
Well, yes, feel free to pay full price, but I'm just saying that that's a good idea, David.
Well, what did David say?
A hybrid, book web thing.
Right. So do you want to talk about your other project, your healthcare project?
Okay, sure. And this is directed to those of you who don't live in France, who don't have our fabulous national health care. For the last several years, I've been writing about senior citizen issues, specifically healthcare in the United States, or lack thereof. And I recently launched a Substack called the Medicare Reporter, which attempts to explain the ins and outs and the basics of Medicare to people who are on Medicare, because those of you who are on Medicare know that nobody understands it. It's a good program, but there are a lot of problems with it, a lot of difficult to understand language, and very involved regulations. And one of the biggest problems that those on Medicare have is actually understanding their options, understanding the difference between Parts A, Parts B, Part C, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So a number of years ago, when I was looking into my own Medicare needs, I realized that this was an issue. And my late husband said, you know, that sounds like a website. And I said, yeah, you're right. So I launched the Medicare Reporter on Substack back in June. And that's Medicare, substack.medicarereporter.com.
Patty or Bernard, you can find it and stick it up here. But by the way, Patty listed, she posted the Amazon link to your book. She says it's only $12.99. So is that a fair enough price?
I would say that's still overpriced. The original list price was like $17.95, but.
And for Kindle, it's $11.99. Kindle is great. That's how I read all my books now.
But yeah, if you want to buy it, and obviously if you have any questions, just feel free to email me.
Okay, and what email do you want us to give them?
Toni Kamins at Gmail.
Okay, let's see. Let's put that one in. Oh, there you go. Patty's ahead of me. See, I knew she would be. Yeah. Well, okay, if we have no more questions, we can all hang out and talk, unmute and talk to each other.
I gotta go.
And just relax. And we can talk about anything. So anybody has any questions about any topic, we're here.
I have a question. I'd like to know if any of you here have recently or in the last few years been to Les Jules Verne for dinner.
Yeah, we did. We did.
Wait.
Okay.
In the last few years?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I know booking a reservation from the United States, they require a down payment per person. And I just thought, okay, I was there in '89 for lunch, and I'm sure it's changed, but I just wondered. But thank you, David.
Yeah, a lot of restaurants like that are requiring that you put some money down in advance.
Yeah.
You really do show up. It's credited against your bill, and it's difficult, but these are expensive restaurants, and they can't afford to leave it. They can't afford to leave tables, empty.
But
it's also true. It's also true in the United States. There are restaurants that won't take a reservation without a credit card.
Many.
Yeah.
I mean, was it good? That's the number one question. How was it?
Well, the Jules Verne, also, I want to point out that it was recently completely remodeled from top to bottom. It's a new chef. The one that was there before starts with a D. He basically got kicked out, and they got a new one in. And so it's been completely soup to nuts, has been redone. So
We have
I'm
not
sure
been there.
David can.
We've not been there since it was redone.
I so envy all of you living in France. It's always been my life dream. And Adrian, as you know, I've met with you once before in Paris. And I was wondering, is it crazy for somebody to rent an apartment and maybe just be there 3 months out of the year? Is that be considered a waste of money?
I don't think that. I mean, if you want to spend your money that way, why not? I mean,
Paris is never a waste of money.
I know. I love it. And Adrian always encourages my dreams.
I think living in France is probably 3 months of good mental health, which would save you money.
I agree
Ella,
with
why don't you put on your video, your camera?
Oh, because I'm in my kitchen in very bad lighting. But I will.
This is
So-
this is Ella Dyer, who works with us in Nice. She's one of our prime HR search consultants, and she's also the author of Nice in Nice, the book. And I am the godmother of her child.
Of one of my children.
One of her children, right? There's Simone.
No, to that very, very valid question, I would say, Adrian, we just received an email from some lovely clients that have rented a beautiful apartment here in Nice, and they've rented it for 1 year. And when they arrived to rent the apartment, they stayed maybe 6 weeks, and they probably will not be back until March. But for them, it's their escape. So if you want to rent an apartment for a couple of months in Paris, I will come visit you. But if you want to do it anywhere in France, please do, because it's probably really, really good for your mental health.
Thank you.
Well, you know, in today's world, with the difficulty of renting short term, has made that, you know, like you could probably, before, you could rent the same apartment over and over and book it on a short-term basis, which is no longer really, I mean, it's possible, but very difficult to do because of the rental laws, especially in Paris, not so much in Nice. So it makes sense to rent something that you just call your own on a long-term lease, and it's a lot less expensive, actually, when you do that, because you amortize it over the year, and the rents on a yearly basis are a lot less expensive than short-term rentals.
Yeah, Adrian's just right. We've rented an apartment, actually in the same building I lived at, in a much grander apartment back in the 1980s when I was with CBS. But we've rented this apartment for about 8 or 9 years. Adrian's seen it. She's been in it. It's very
I was
small.
just there recently.
That's right, you were. And, you know, it's basically an L-shaped studio in the 7th. And you know, we go over like maybe 3 or 4 times a year for at least a month each, but we have it year round, and we have all of our things in it. We get on a plane and we go over, we have a carry-on, that's it. It's very convenient when you amortize it, as Adrian says, over a whole year. You know, when you figure how much you pay for a hotel room, even if it's like a couple $100 a night, you know, plus all your meals and whatever we eat in the apartment, it really works out.
It pays off. Yeah. Well, rents in Paris are actually very inexpensive compared to the value of the property.
Yeah.
And there's rent control. So it's not that big a deal. I mean, you can rent a studio or 1 bedroom somewhere between 900 and 1,500 euros a month.
Yeah, we pay 1,000 euros a month, and
Wow.
we pay another, you know, 200 euros a month for everything, electricity, utilities, all of, you know, Wi-Fi, cable television, phones and everything. The whole thing is like maybe $1,200 a month.
They have a great studio. It's in what was originally Chambre de Bonne that were combined and opened up, put together. And
I hope the building has an elevator.
To the 5th floor. One floor you got to walk up by yourself, but
right, 1 flight you have to walk up. But then they have beautiful views and gorgeous light.
right?
Right?
See the top of the Eiffel
They
Tower.
see the Eiffel Tower, yeah.
Les Toits de Paris, the roofs of Paris. Can't beat that.
I'm drooling.
Yeah, I've got a great apartment. I've got a 2-bedroom in the 15th. And a similar space in New York would be, I can't
Three
probably
times, Tony.
$6,000 a month.
Yeah.
And yeah, rents in Paris are cheaper than they are in New York. To
Oh,
buy is another story.
One third to 1/2 as expensive as New York.
Yeah, buying is another story.
Yeah.
But buying, remember, you don't have, like we have a co-op in Manhattan. We pay a fortune in co-op fees every month.
Yeah.
You wouldn't have it all in Paris. So you put that into a mortgage, you work it out, it still can work out.
Yeah, I've got a co-op in the West Village that I'm subletting now, and it's a fortune.
Yeah, the maintenance fees. Tell me about it. I'm supporting my New York apartment. Yeah, it's crazy. Anybody have any other questions related to anything?
By the way, I have a Substack page as well, Tony. I don't mean to horn in, but I just started it on Sunday. It's called David Andelman Unleashed. And
we're in trouble, David.
and I'm chronicling the French elections. My regular targets of opportunity, CNN and NBC, are not as compelled by the French elections as I am, but I'm chronicling the French elections through June, and at least. So
okay. I will sign up.
There you go. It's free for the moment.
Put the link in the chat, please.
Yeah, put the link in the chat to everyone.
Could I just say something? I got your email to get on the Zoom thing, and it said 6 o'clock French time. I did a conversion. It came out 1 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. So I got on at 1 o'clock, and I got the feeling you've been talking for at least an hour before I got on. So is it really 12 o'clock Eastern Standard Time?
Yes, 6 hours difference.
Yeah, so your information was wrong. I don't know where you got that, but that was.
I got it off the web, but so for future Zoom classes, I'll know that it's 6 hours and not 5 hours.
Except during daylight savings. There's 1 week where the daylight savings time is different.
Right.
Europe versus US. So there's
Right. Yeah. At one, it's 5 hours at that point, but yeah, normally it's 6 hours.
Normally
Thank you.
6.
Yeah, I missed most of your presentation, and I won't do that again. Thank you.
What is the status now? Do you have to purchase a time ticket to go to most of the museums? I know when I was there a year and a half ago, that was not the case.
They like for you to actually, buy a ticket in advance now, but you can usually also wait in line, but you might wait longer.
You can't wait. The wait is long. When we went to the Louis Vuitton exhibit, the Louis Vuitton Foundation to see the Russian arts exhibit, the line to get in was for the time was extremely long. That whole line had to go in before they were going to allow anybody in from the line that was just showed up. So it really is advisable to.
Yeah, it's better to go ahead and get your ticket in advance.
But that particular museum, the line is always really long, even when you buy your tickets in advance. It's always long there.
But it's a well-managed line.
It is.
It is true. It is true.
So I have a question. Nobody's brought this up, and I don't mean to make it a damper, but
can you try to speak louder or closer into your mic?
Does this help?
Oh my
goodness,
yes.
Okay. Sorry. So I've been so careful during COVID, and I've barely stepped away from home, and I'm amazed at how many people have been traveling, especially overseas. And I'm hoping that with this Omicron thing that we have, that it's going to fizzle out by spring so that I can come to Paris this summer. Could you please speak to the situation about COVID in Paris or in France now, and what kind of restrictions there are, and how the infection rate is going and all that kind of stuff? Thank you.
The thing about COVID is that everything's changing so rapidly that what is true today may not be true at the end of the week. I was just reading an article about some new complications from Omicron that are showing up in Israel that hadn't been presented themselves before. So, it's really very difficult to say.
Maybe Omicron is anti-Semitic.
Yes, definitely.
I'm sorry.
Definitely.
But it's also on Cyprus, so you take your choice.
So, in France, in Paris, we're supposed to be wearing masks, even outside now. It's required on public transportation. Not everybody complies. It's really tough to know. If you look back at the last 6 months, I think the one thing that you see is that you can't predict anything.
Right.
So the one thing I can tell you is that when I moved here a year ago, I took Air France over, and the sanitary precautions were fantastic. And I flew back and forth between Paris and New York over the summer on Air France, and it was the same thing. I have less problem getting on a plane than probably getting on the metro, but
Oh, yeah, definitely.
it's impossible to say.
Yeah, I would think
The
that.
only good thing
sorry.
is that most airlines have a very flexible ticketing policy now. So if you buy your tickets and have to cancel, you won't have a problem.
Well,
One other suggestion. We came back last week on American Airlines. Now we fortunately have a huge amount of frequent flyer miles, but we use them to upgrade to business. If you have the ability to do that, buy an economy ticket and upgrade. My suggestion is do that, because you get your own little pod in the business, and we felt very safe. And it's been 8 days since we came back, so knock wood. We're
Was the plane full?
yes, the plane was extremely full.
Wow.
The business had 2 empty seats, and
Because
back in economy, it was really packed.
I mean, I was on the train from Nice to Paris yesterday, and literally, I think there were 4 people in my car.
Wow.
The trains have been empty.
But remember,
Holidays are
this
over.
came after our trip came right after the January 1st weekend. We came on Tuesday after the January 1st weekend, and a lot of flights were canceled and so on over that weekend.
Oh,
So I
that,
think
yeah.
they
Right.
doubled up.
Right.
But I think the planes across the Atlantic, they've cut back so much on the schedule because they want to fill the planes. That's how they make money.
Right.
Yeah.
And,
David, how many miles did you need to use to upgrade?
I think it was 50,000 each way, something like that.
That's pretty good. That's pretty
more
good.
than that's more because I always fly on American miles, and it's 30,000 one way, for a coach seat. So you're saying it's an additional 50,000 for?
Yeah, well, we didn't pay. We paid cash, and then it's 50,000 plus. There's you have to pay a few $100s in cash as well.
Wow.
On the upgrade, but we felt it was worth it.
I'm going to give you another hint, though. I always book seats in the very back section of the plane because they tend to fill it from front to back. And so very often I have 2 or 3 seats to myself by being in the back of the plane.
It is a good tip. There's also a couple of areas where there's just 2 seats there, and then the one next to it is empty. I mean, there's no seat.
That's
so
right.
we booked that a couple of times when going forward to see whether we get the upgrade eventually. But we booked those protectively, so it would just be myself and my wife next to each other, and so we did that.
My husband and I would book an aisle and a window seat in the same row and hope that nobody would take that middle seat.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Good way to go.
I'm an upgrader myself, so.
Well, I have to preserve my miles so that I can go back and forth more often. I think I only have about 270,000 miles right now.
I wouldn't be afraid of traveling, though. The biggest problem is if you were to get sick, then you'd be stuck.
Good place to be stuck.
Well, that's
All right,
it.
I have one other tip. There's a thing called Geo Blue, which we subscribe to. For myself and my wife, it's $400 for the year for the 2 of us. And what it does is it basically allows you a free doctor anywhere in France, free hospital basically anywhere in France. You can go to the American hospital in Neuilly, for instance, and it's free.
Wow.
It's like 1,000 euros a night for the room. But it only works for overseas. You can't be there for longer than 30 days on a trip. And you can do as many trips as you like in a year, but no more than 30 days on each one. Hopefully we fudge a little bit. That's between us, but we've been very happy with that. And you can choose the doctor. If you choose one of their doctors, you don't have to pay anything. You just walk in the door to him. Otherwise, they'll reimburse you afterwards. And if you're caught anywhere and you have to be medevac back to the States, they give you $100,000 for medevac. So
that is wonderful. I always take travel insurance when I go overseas. Yeah. And in 2015 in the south of France, I broke my ankle. And I went to the hospital of Saint-Tropez and got wonderful, very affordable medical attention. But I did come home to have the surgery.
Yeah.
But because I had the travel insurance, I was able to go home business class instead of the coach ticket that I had booked. And this way I could extend my leg. And so that was all covered by the insurance.
Thank you, Bernard, for putting that Geo Blue in the chat room.
Yeah, he did, Bernard. Yeah, Bernard put a link in the chat.
That's great to have.
Right.
Thank you.
I get no commission.
Well, I appreciate the tip.
Well, you're getting the kudos instead, okay?
Just come and listen to my event when I do it, right, Adrian?
Absolutely, absolutely.
I was just going to say that David's
you're
joining us.
scheduled. Yeah, David is scheduled to speak. What's your date? June, is it?
Yeah, I think it's right after the French parliamentary elections. In June.
Patty, can you just check? It's June, right?
Let's see.
You're looking?
I'm looking good.
Do we think Macron will be reelected?
Yes.
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 June 14th.
There you go. See, June 14th. I remembered.
That's Donald Trump's birthday.
We will definitely have lots to talk about.
I didn't know that, Tony. I would never have thought to know that.
I know it because it was Harold's birthday also.
Okay.
And it's Flag Day.
Yes.
And Adrian's is October 14th. Anybody who's following.
Sue, I just want to share something with you. Be careful, because I had Allianz travel insurance, and I had to cancel because British Air canceled my flights because of COVID. I didn't have COVID, but they canceled. And Allianz said, oh no, we're not covering that. So please read the fine print. I didn't.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, good to know. Thank
It was
you.
as though it was as though I didn't have insurance.
I think I wouldn't, in today's climate, I think I can make my reservation. And if I reserve on miles, there's no problem switching it to another time or putting the miles back into my bank. And I would probably wait till close to the departure date to take out the insurance, but that's a great tip. Thank you.
Wow. Well, we've got 8 more minutes, you guys. If there's anything else you want to talk about.
I want to echo what Christina just put in the chat. Thank you so much for doing this on Zoom. It's been a pleasure, and hopefully, I know it's complicated for you, but if you can do them on Zoom, even when you go back to live, that would be so nice.
We just have to figure this out technically. Bernard, you're in charge of that.
You know, the American Library in Paris is doing a series for with the Overseas Press Club of America that I'm kind of running, and they're doing hybrid. They have a room at the American Library in Paris, and then in that room they have set up a small camera. So you can actually do it with a laptop, aimed at the panel, and so you can't actually see the people in the room, but you can see all the people on the Zoom. And so we take questions from the Zoom people or from in the room. It's hybrid, and it seems to work very well. All you need is Wi-Fi in the location where you're doing it.
Well, it did work very well there because I was there and witnessed it, but they have their own beautiful facility that's quiet and situation. Whereas when we do this, we do it upstairs at a cafe. It's not really set up in a theater situation the way the American Library is. There's a lot of external noise. It's just,
they don't have good internet.
Yeah, it's not as easy. The American Library has a really perfect situation. And I don't think they'd let us use their facility without a big chunk of change. So unfortunately, I mean, the thing is that doing it upstairs at the cafe, they let us do that free of charge, just, because people come and order drinks. I've been doing.
What about in a bookstore? What about in a bookstore? I mean, they will probably have Wi-Fi, and bookstore, I'm sure, would be happy to have,
No, because it interrupts their business day. This is a situation, I've been doing it at this same cafe since 2003. We're like family there. It works very well for our purposes. And unfortunately, this has been it's been a temporary situation, quite honestly, that we've had to deal with. So we're just trying to do the best we can. And if we can offer it on Zoom, we will, but we're trying to work it out. It's just not easy, unfortunately. What can I say? Yeah. And you don't want me to, if we charged for this, we would have the money to do it with, but we don't. And I don't really ever want to charge for this. I just want to make this available so that we can all take part in it.
The other thing that maybe think about, Adrian, is to have one, the same month that you have that, do one, and then 2 weeks later have a similar one on Zoom, so the people who couldn't see the original one can.
Oh yeah, let's double our workload.
Right.
Thank you.
David, Adrian runs a business doing real estate.
Oh, that's right, of course.
Right. We do
Of course,
real estate,
Oh, is that
we
what
do
she
property
does?
searches, right? We help people move to France.
And I do this for fun.
Yes.
So do we.
Well, there you go. So I don't want to give it up, even though as long as it doesn't take up too much time, we can do it. And look how many fantastic speakers we've had over the years. Amazing.
It's amazing.
It's
Mhm.
amazing. We've had the most interesting topics and conversations. You guys unfortunately missed Lisa Nesselson last month talking about Woody Allen, and that was a blast. I mean, absolutely hilariously fun.
Just having you, Adrian, is a blast. So there we are.
Can you record and post your live things, even if you don't do them on Zoom? Is it possible to record?
Yes, in fact, that's a really good possibility.
Okay, so
that is actually a really good possibility. So Bernard, you and I are in charge of that, because I do have this equipment, thanks to House Hunters International. I do have a tripod and all that stuff from when we did a show during confinement from my apartment. They had to ship me all this equipment, so I have it. And we could probably set up a way to at least record it, and that could be a very good alternative. So thank you for that suggestion.
Yeah, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Of course, I'd much rather be there in person, but until that can happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. No. That's probably a better possibility than the Zoom.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So you guys, we are down to the last few minutes. So if there's anything you want to ask, now's the time. Of Toni or me or anybody. Pamela.
Yeah, I just want to, it's wonderful visiting with you all, and Adrian, keep this up. And you have, this is all family, and then you get these wonderful ideas, just like now. Oh, well, maybe we can send a recording or whatever. But you've been, just keep up. I just wish you longevity, health, humor, friendship, connection, love, good food. And that's for
we were
everybody.
just talking recently. I've been threatening to retire at the age of 70 for a long time. But it doesn't look like anyone's going to let me.
But Adrian,
Well,
you
you
gotta
know,
have at least 10 more
retirement
years.
can be fun. I mean, it can be fun. Yeah.
Adrian, you got to have at least 10 more years then, right? Till 70.
Okay, I guess I'll keep
15.
going.
So many more years of productivity.
Oh, I'm gonna have as many as my mother had, at least.
Yes, there you go. There's at least 25, Adrian. You're
Right.
not
Exactly.
going anywhere.
And
We need
still
you.
working. Yes, and still
Well,
working.
is my sister still on? Or did she go away? My sister.
I don't see her.
I think Lee went away. Now that she's not there, I guess I can talk behind her back, right? My sister, who you saw earlier talking about how she knows what's going on in the Jewish life in the United States, That woman is 82.
Wow.
And I don't know, yes, I don't know if you noticed, but she didn't look much older than me.
No, she doesn't.
No, and she swears she doesn't color her hair, so we don't know for sure, but that's what she says.
Well, Adrian and I are exactly the same age, so.
I think I'm older.
I'm definitely
I
older.
know I'm older.
I'm glad I'm usually the oldest one in the room, so I'm glad I'm not here. Oh, goodness. But yeah, hopefully we've got it in our genes, and it looks like I'm not retiring anytime soon because you guys won't let me. We'll just keep going.
Good.
Yeah, but you have to keep coming to France, okay? And on that note, I'm going to say au revoir. And
A bientôt.
no, and Toni
Okay,
came in.
Andrews.
Thank you. Toni came in.
You're very
Thank you
welcome.
very, very, very much for such an insightful and interesting conversation, and to all of you who participated, and for, you know, hunting on the last minute so you could be here.
Thank you.
À la prochaine. Thank you, guys. Good night.
Thank you all.
Oh, wow.
Bye.
A
Bye-bye.
bientôt. Merci.